What happens when two guys, both household names, both respected for vastly different reasons, meet eyeball to eyeball on national TV, and it all goes pear-shaped, not in a contrived, scripted, showbiz kind of way, but in the sort of uncut, cringeworthy moment where the room falls silent, the smiles disappear, and the truth, no matter how messy, it begins to reveal itself. It was meant to be another pit stop on the press tour. Leonardo DiCaprio, the Oscar-winning actor and career environmentalist, was on hand to discuss his new documentary on global warming, a topic he's championed for decades, a mission he's invested time, resources, and his public platform into. And across from him, Stephen Colbert, a fast wit, sharp mouth, button pusher with encroaching grin. What ensued wasn't your standard late-night exchange. No jokes, no friendly shots, both camps can play off. Rather, what we got was something deeper and disconcerting. There's something virtually old school about hoping for a measure of decency on TV, particularly in interviews. You watch expecting to witness a discussion, perhaps even something informative or sincere. But with this one, something went haywire. And quickly, if you've ever been disappointed by how we treat one another publicly these days, if you've ever seen two individuals talk past rather than to each other, this one may strike a chord. You see, this wasn't merely a celebrity on the defensive, and it wasn't merely a host making tough inquiries. It was a collision between ideals and egos, between passion and provocation, between someone striving to inspire change and someone who wishes to cut through the blather. And it makes you wonder, when did our discussions become so aggressive? Can we discuss big stuff, real, hard stuff, without ripping each other to shreds? Can we question without attempting to win points? Can we care passionately about causes without needing to be perfect? To many of us, particularly those of us who have witnessed the change in culture across decades, from good-natured disagreement to all-out battle, it seemed like something greater was on the line in that studio than just egos. Perhaps it was the uncomfortable moments when the audience was unsure whether to applaud or wince. Or perhaps it was the way both men, separately, appeared to struggle for something greater than the final word. And perhaps, just perhaps, we saw a little of ourselves in that dialogue. Because at its heart, this wasn't about celebrities. It was about values, about the way that we treat each other when we don't see eye to eye, about how quickly good can go bad, and how difficult it is to remain anchored when the lights are bright and the stakes become personal. You don't have to side with anyone to feel the gravity of what occurred, and that's why this moment is worth sitting with. So in today's deep dive, we are going to go through what actually transpired that evening. Not only the headlines or the viral video, but the emotional cadence of the exchange, the nonverbal signals, and the larger questions it poses about how we speak, how we listen, and what we demand from those who stand in the limelight. Because sometimes what cuts through the noise isn't necessarily what's being said, but what it says about the world we live in today. Let's dive in. What happens when one of Hollywood's most vocal environmentalists finds herself in a heated, unscripted confrontation on live TV? What you're about to hear wasn't scripted. It began as a casual late-night interview, but escalated to one of television's most discussed confrontations. The cameras were rolling, the audience watched, and what began as cordial small talk suddenly took an awkward, possibly heated turn, leaving the entire studio in utter shock. Before we get into what actually went down, don't forget to tap that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. What do you guys think about train wreck celebrity interviews? It was all business as usual on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert one evening. The crowd was abuzz, waiting for the night's guest, Leonardo DiCaprio. He had come to promote his new documentary on climate change, something well within his way of longtime activism. As perhaps one of the most vocal celebrities when it comes to environmental causes, DiCaprio was making the rounds to raise awareness, as he'd done countless times before. It all seemed normal, typical Hollywood fluff, but what none of the audience members were aware was that Colbert had other things planned for this specific interview. The program started off with Colbert's familiar charm. His monologue arrived as always, sarcastic jokes, political one-liners, some chuckles over the day's top stories. The studio audience laughed along, unaware of any hint of the tempest that was brewing behind the scenes in secret. Then came the big guest intro. Colbert's grin stretched a bit wider than usual, just slightly too polished, like he was holding back a secret. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please welcome the Academy Award-winning actor, environmental activist, and someone who definitely knows how to pick his battles, Leonardo DiCaprio." The audience erupted in applause as DiCaprio strode on stage with that familiar, humble wave. Wearing a crisp but unadorned dark suit, he appeared at ease, like a guy who'd performed this sort of thing 100 times before. He glided into the guest chair readily, poised to discuss his mission. At first, the conversation flowed smoothly. Colbert congratulated him on the new film and asked about his ongoing efforts to fight climate change. "So, Leo," Colbert began, leaning in with a thoughtful tone, "you've been in this fight for decades. Tell us about this new project." DiCaprio replied with cool zeal. "Well, Stephen, this film is all about what we can do now, as individuals and as a society. We're at a tipping point. Every year, every month, it all counts. The science is loud and clear. We have to act." You could hear the dedication in his voice. He wasn't doing PR. This was something he cared about deeply. And then Colbert changed gears. "Interesting," he replied with a slight smile. "You know, I must inquire, hope you don't mind, but there has been some criticism of your own life. The private planes, the mansions, yacht parties, and half-your-age models." He let the silence last for a beat. "Some people might say that's hypocritical. How do you respond to that?" The words loomed in the air, as if a window had opened and an icy blast of wind had rushed in. DiCaprio's expression shifted for a fraction of a moment. A flash of annoyance passed across before he hastily recovered. He was obviously taken aback. Now, this wasn't the first time that Leonardo DiCaprio had been questioned regarding the disparity between his public activism and his private lifestyle. But there was something in Colbert's tone that signaled this was not going to be a lighthearted surface question. This was going deeper. "Stephen," Leo started, measured but resolute, "I've spoken about it before. Yes, I do travel for work. Yes, I do fly jets. But I also take actual action to balance that out. I've invested millions in renewable energy initiatives and conservation efforts. My carbon footprint is balanced considerably by the work I support. And more critically, this entire emphasis on personal behavior is precisely what big oil companies wish for. They want to divert our attention from the actual problem, systemic change." Colbert smiled, but it no longer reached his eyes. There was an edge behind it. "Sure, sure," he replied, leaning forward. "But let's stick on those personal decisions for a moment. Last month, you were photographed on a yacht off the Mediterranean. You were accompanied by several young women, and that yacht burns 500 gallons of fuel an hour. That's more than the average American uses in a whole year. So how do you reconcile that with telling people to drive less and turn down their thermostats?" The atmosphere in the studio was changing. You could sense it. The crowd, who were still applauding just moments before, began to mutter uncomfortably. Something didn't feel right. DiCaprio clenched his jaw momentarily. He obviously sensed the strain, but remained calm. "Stephen, I believe you're losing sight of the larger picture," he explained, his tone more stern now. "We're dealing with a crisis of humanity, something that will determine the future of mankind. And you're questioning me about paparazzi shots? I mean, seriously, my private life and my work as an advocate are not one and the same. I'm not perfect, nobody is, but I'm doing everything within my power to bring attention and create actual change." Colbert didn't retreat. In fact, his tone became more acrimonious. "Ah, I see, so it's do as I say, not as I do. Quite convenient, isn't it?" He rocked back slightly, eyes narrowing. "Here's what I find interesting, Leo. You've built a career as an actor out of playing men with intense moral dilemmas, but in real life, you're quite certain that you have it all worked out. Climate change is evil, but private jets are okay, as long as you write a check afterwards to ease your conscience." The air in the room was heavy. You could hear a pin drop. This was no longer awkward. This was more. The kind of moment that is remembered by people long after the credits roll. DiCaprio leaned forward, and for the first time, the cool mask slipped a little. "Sorry, what are you trying to do here, Stephen?" he said, his tone a little more harsh. You really want to discuss climate change? Or are you only looking for a viral moment? I came here prepared to have a serious discussion about one of the most significant challenges our world is facing. But if all you want to do is engage in tabloid behavior, then perhaps we should call it. That lit a spark in Colbert's eyes. He saw that he'd struck a nerve, and frankly, he looked pleased. Oh, I think we are having a serious conversation, he replied. I'm just trying to understand how someone who tells the world to cut emissions can live the way you do. Isn't that a fair question? DiCaprio's voice rose slightly. If this was really about fairness, you'd be asking about climate policy. You'd be talking about the science, but you're not. You're not asking about my renewable energy investments, DiCaprio said, his voice tight with frustration. You're asking about gossip magazine photos. You're making it personal. That's not journalism. That's harassment. The studio tension was now so thick you could cut it with a knife. You could see the camera guys craning slightly, not wanting to blink, lest they miss a moment. The crowd, frozen by indecision, should they gasp, clap, simply hold their breath? But Colbert didn't retreat. Instead, he leaned in further, obviously revved up by DiCaprio's response. Harassment? Colbert asked, arching an eyebrow. Get serious, Leo. You're a public figure. Climate activism has become the centerpiece of your public persona. Your own lifestyle is included in that discussion. When you say ordinary citizens need to make sacrifices, drive less, fly less, consume less, and then go and live like a billionaire jet setter, to call that out isn't harassment, it's accountability. That was the last straw. DiCaprio stood up suddenly, the chair creaking behind him as he stood. For the first time, he was really angry. Accountability? He retorted. Let's have a discussion about that. How about we discuss how the media has dumbed down the climate crisis into catchphrases and clickbait headlines? Or how talk show hosts like yourself would prefer to go after ratings rather than really discuss what's going on with our planet? The studio was now almost humming with electricity. The crew members off camera even looked stunned, not knowing whether to cut to a commercial break or allow the moment to pass. Everyone sensed it. This was not an interview of a celebrity anymore. This was something more. Sit down, Leo. We're not done here, Colbert told him, mock firmly. He sat back in his chair, his face creased with a smug little smile. You appeared on our show to market your documentary. The least you can do is wrap up the interview like a grown-up. DiCaprio remained on his feet, his fists bunched minutely at his waist. Professional? He repeated, amazed. This is professional? What began as a worthwhile chance to discuss issues of substance has devolved into an ambush on a personal level. You're not here to help people learn about the science. You're only here to make cheap attacks. Colbert let out a derisive laugh and waved away with a dismissive hand. Oh, please. You Hollywood folks are all the same, he retorted, amplifying his voice for the crowd. You adore teaching the world how to live, what to drive, what to eat, what to believe. But the minute someone calls you on it, suddenly it's all too much. At this point, the crowd was absolutely enthralled. Some were quietly pulling out their phones, despite the signs reading, "No recording." Nobody had ever experienced anything like this on a late-night show. Backstage, the production staff looked nervously at each other. But still, nobody stood up to stop it. DiCaprio shut his eyes briefly, breathed in deeply, and attempted to ground himself. Stephen, he said evenly, I've taken tough questions before. I've debated people who outright deny climate science. I've stood in front of hostile crowds. I've been challenged by real journalists. But this? He looked directly at Colbert. This isn't tough questioning. This is a hit job. And there's a difference. Colbert let out a booming laugh, clearly trying to play to the crowd now. He turned toward the audience, gesturing grandly. Ladies and gentlemen, he said theatrically, apparently asking a celebrity to explain their contradictions is now considered character assassination. I guess when you're used to easy interviews and flattering media coverage, Colbert said sharply, a real question feels like an attack. DiCaprio's face reddened with rage, the pent-up frustration now written all over his face. Real questions? He echoed, aghast. You've not asked a single substantive question of me about the science of climate, renewable energy policy, or actual environmental remedies. All you're interested in is my personal life, like you're writing for a tabloid. Is that really the kind of discourse in which you want to engage? Colbert didn't skip a beat. His tone escalated with the rising temperature in the room. Tell me what you want, he snapped. I'll let the truth be known. I want honest talk. I want to call hypocrisy hypocrisy when I see it. You want to save the earth, Leo? Fine. Begin by walking the walk. Refrain from flying around in private jets. Sell some of those mansions. Then people might believe you. The whole studio was quiet. No music, no action. Nothing but sound, heavy and dense. DiCaprio scowled at Colbert with unhidden disdain. And when he spoke, his voice was softer now, but brimming with tightly wound rage. You know what, Stephen? He said. You're right about one thing. People should practice what they preach. So maybe you should take your own advice about honesty and drop the jokes as a shield so you don't have to discuss real issues with real people. Colbert's eyebrows leapt upwards in mock surprise. Excuse me, he said, feigning surprise. I believe you're mixed up as to who's avoiding whom. I'm the one asking tough questions. You're the one getting defensive because you don't appreciate being called on your actions. DiCaprio moved forward over Colbert's desk, his voice rising once more, his stance squared. Held accountable? By you, he barked. What makes you think you have the right to hold someone accountable for anything? You're a comedian. You make jokes about the news. You're not a journalist. You're not a scientist. You're not an expert on climate. You're just another media personality trying to get clicks and ratings. That stung. For the first time, that signature smirk of Colbert's wavered, just for an instant. But then it came back, harder than ever. Well, Colbert replied icily, at least I'm truthful about what I am. I don't pretend to be some green saint while behaving like a carbon-emitting rock star. I don't travel everywhere in the world on private planes telling everyone else to ride their bikes. DiCaprio wasn't missing a beat. And you don't fly around doing anything beneficial whatsoever, he retorted. You sit in front of that desk every evening cracking jokes while the world burns. At least I'm attempting to do something, no matter how imperfect it's trying to be. What are you doing other than dismantling individuals who are actually attempting to make a positive impact? The crowd was now sitting on the edge of their seats. Some of them appeared visibly uneasy with how aggressively things had escalated, while others were practically giddy at the drama playing out right before their eyes. The cameras just kept rolling, recording every utterance, every glare, every hard breath. Colbert slowly rose from behind his desk, his own posture now aping DiCaprio's defiance. The room's temperature seemed to have risen 10 degrees. What am I doing? He asked, his voice ascending. I'm holding you accountable. That's what I'm doing. I'm asking the questions your fan clubs and fawning interviewers are too afraid to touch. Colbert fired off. I'm pointing out that maybe, just maybe, people shouldn't be taking environmental advice from someone who burns more fossil fuel in a single month than most families do in an entire year. DiCaprio didn't hesitate. And perhaps people shouldn't take anything he has to say seriously from a guy whose greatest contribution is making jokes about politicians on late-night television, he sneered. You want to talk about contributing to actual conversation? Fine. What have you done to advance the conversation on climate change? When did you last have a climate scientist on this program? Or conducted a substantive segment on renewable energy policy? Colbert's face was red now. The sleek host persona had slipped away altogether. Gloves were off. I don't need to hire climate scientists to see through hypocrisy when I see it, he fired back. And that's what you are, Leo, a hypocrite. You've become so accustomed to being complimented on your activism that when someone calls you out on your conduct, you fall apart. And you, DiCaprio shot back, are a narrow-minded agitator who so craven applause, you've lost sight of what actual conversation looks like. This right here is exactly why we can't have serious discussion about serious stuff. You bring everything down to a joke. They now faced each other, faces pinched with tension, like two pugilists eyeing each other up for the bell. The crowd was frozen in stunned silence. No laughter, no movement, just complete disbelief at how far this interview had descended. Colbert leaned forward, his voice low and snapping but still biting crisply through the mic. You do know what your true issue is, Leo. You can't bear the fact that nobody's buying your gilt-edged veneer. You've been saddled with yes men and handlers so long, you don't even know what honest criticism sounds like. DiCaprio's eyes narrowed. And your issue, Stephen, is that you've gotten cynicism mixed up with intelligence. You believe that being tough makes you honest, but in fact, it only makes you bitter. You've lost faith in the possibility of actual change, and now you tear down anyone who attempts it. By now, the personal shots had escalated far beyond what either of them likely ever envisioned when they sat down to discuss the environment. What started as a discussion regarding activism had fallen apart into a contentious, scathing exchange of judgments and insults. Colbert stood up, his voice growing again, loud and clear. Given up, he repeated, disbelieving. I've never given up on anything. I simply don't buy your Hollywood savior complex. You're not saving the planet, Leo. You're merely attempting to assuage your guilt over your sybaritic lifestyle by throwing money at eco-groups and lecturing others to sacrifice. At least I'm spending money on something that counts, DiCaprio snapped. What are you donating, Stephen? What are you donating, aside from negativity and penny-pincher cynicism? Say what you will about my so-called savior complex, but at least I'm attempting to do something substantive. Your attitude serves no one. The tension had come to a boil. The two men were clearly shaken, grunting, faces flushed with rage and adrenaline. In the studio, the air hung heavy with menace. Everyone in the room knew it. Something historic was taking place right under their noses. There was absolute silence. Nobody moved. The two men glared at each other across the desk, engaged in a war of wills. At last, Colbert interrupted the silence with a harsh, bitter laugh that sliced through the air like a knife. You know what, Leo? He stated. This has been absolutely perfect. You just made my argument for me better than I ever could. The moment someone challenges your expertly buffed public image, you collapse. This, here, is the very type of celebrity breakdown people want to witness. DiCaprio's tone, on the other hand, was hushed, but it had a sharp bite that couldn't be ignored. Entitled Celebrity Meltdown? He said, drawling. Stephen, you've spent the past 20 minutes hurling personal insults rather than engaging in the conversation I've come here to have. You made this into a sideshow, and now you expect me to apologize for responding to your utter lack of professionalism? Colbert's voice rose again, his frustration clearly feeding off the tension. Unprofessional? He repeated. I'm doing my job. My job is to ask tough questions, to hold public figures accountable. Your job, apparently, is to lecture everyone about saving the planet while living like an environmental wrecking ball. DiCaprio shook his head in disbelief, his expression somewhere between shock and anger. This isn't accountability, Stephen, he said. This is harassment disguised as journalism. You're not here for a real conversation. You're here to tear me down for laughs and for views. Colbert scoffed, then turned to the audience with theatrical flair. Oh, so now it's harassment again, he said, gesturing grandly. Ladies and gentlemen, apparently asking a celebrity to explain their contradictions is harassment. Apparently expecting some basic consistency from a guy who tells everyone how to live is too much. A few of the audience members started fidgeting in their seats. What began as a raunchy interview had devolved into something else, something intimate. A few audience members even looked toward the exits, wondering if they should hang around for the rest. DiCaprio gazed about the studio with obvious disdain. You're performing, Stephen, pressing global issues. What I haven't done is feign perfection, like some individuals who apparently believe cynicism somehow makes them better. Morally superior? Colbert's laughter was bitter. I'm not saying I'm better than everyone. I just say what's evidently hypocritical. But I suppose that makes me the bad guy in your story. No, Stephen, DiCaprio shot back, his voice firm but edged. What you are doing that makes you the bad guy in this scenario is that you prefer tearing people down rather than building anything significant. You care more about making debate points than actually fixing real issues. You've turned what could have been a discussion about one of the biggest challenges facing our world today into a personal attack piece. Back in the wings, the production team grew more and more uncomfortable. Some staffers were nervous, whispering, obviously discussing whether to intervene. But the cameras continued to roll. Everyone recognized that this was no longer merely a tough interview. This had crossed over into the realm of abnormal television. Colbert, unflinching, took on a sarcastic tone. "Oh, I'm sorry I derailed your smoothly practiced publicity tour," he said, overdramatizing. "I didn't know I was supposed to shower you with nothing but praise for your excellent documentary and your impeccable activism. Shame on me for questioning tough questions about your contradictions." DiCaprio's poise finally broke. "Hard questions," he fired back, his face visibly flushed with anger. "You haven't asked me one substantive question, not one. You haven't asked about the science. You haven't asked about policy adjustments. You haven't even raised renewable energy. You've spent the entire time tossing out cheap personal shots like some tabloid writer." "Personal attacks?" Colbert echoed, this time sounding puzzled. "Leo, all that I've raised goes directly to the issue of your credibility as an activist. You expect other people to make sacrifices on behalf of the Earth. Okay. But when you're not willing to do the same, it counts. That's not a personal attack. That's holding you accountable." DiCaprio nodded forward, his tone abrupt. Common sense would be addressing real environmental issues, not fretting over celebrity news. If you actually cared about the world, you'd be using your platform to enlighten and motivate people, not simply provoke them for ratings. Colbert moved in even further, his voice again descending into a tight whisper. "See what I think, Leo," he said. "I think you're afraid. Afraid that people are beginning to see through you. Afraid that maybe, just maybe, your activism isn't about saving the planet. It's about shining your image." That crossed a line. DiCaprio's face blanched with rage. When he did speak, his voice was so repressed it sounded as if it were containing a tempest. "Also, I believe you're a little bitter man," DiCaprio began, voice shaking only barely. "So eager to remain relevant that you'll tear down anyone who's really attempting to make a difference. You've equated cruelty with wit and nastiness with insight." The whole studio was quiet, quietly so. No giggles, no hushed tones, nothing except the soft buzz of the lights and cameras. Even the crew, who were in hushed tones just seconds ago, had ceased talking. Everyone was staring intensely at the two men in the middle of the stage. Colbert moved back a step, a grin of victory creeping onto his face. "There it is," he said, "the real Leonardo DiCaprio. Not the honed, green savior one, but the furious, entitled star who can't stand being challenged." DiCaprio glared at him, his chest going up and down with contained emotion. And then, in a steady but firm voice, he replied, "You know what, Stephen? You're right about one thing. This is the real me. And the real me doesn't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who's already given up on the idea that anything in this world can actually change." Then slowly and deliberately, DiCaprio reached up and unclipped his microphone. The mic fell to the floor with a sharp thud that echoed in the silence. He turned to face the main camera. His expression was firm, but it carried a weight of sadness and disappointment. "To anyone watching this who actually cares about climate change and the future of our planet, don't let cynics like this discourage you," he said. "The world is worth fighting for, even if some would rather mock and tear down those who are trying instead of joining the fight themselves." And then, finally, he spoke to Colbert for the last time. His tone was cutting, but it was also measured. "Good luck on your rating, Stephen. I hope this was worth it." And with that, Leonardo DiCaprio departed the stage, his footsteps reverberating around the studio, the cameras following him until he vanished beyond the curtain and out the backstage entrance. Colbert was standing by himself in the center of the stage. The audience didn't know what to do. No applauding, no laughter, no cheering, just shocked silence. Some gazed. Others shared quiet, uncertain looks. And for an instant, Colbert looked around as if for the first time he was seeing the studio. The gravity of what had just transpired seemed to hit him. What had begun as a tough interview had evolved into something more profound and harmful. When he got back to his desk, the usual bravado and energy were nowhere to be found. His shoulders slumped. His tone was subdued. The studio audience sat in a sort of quiet suspension, all of them trying to process what they'd just seen. It was obvious to all who were witnessing it. They hadn't simply witnessed a tense interview. They had just witnessed something that would be remembered as one of the greatest moments in late-night TV history. And there you have it, a shocking confrontation that took a mundane celebrity interview and turned it into one of the most explosive, cringeworthy, and intimate exchanges ever broadcast. A discussion that began with environmental campaigning escalated into personal insults and laid bare not only the imperfections of a public figure, but also the dangers of pursuing viral moments over true dialogue. Now we'd like to hear from you. Should celebrities be expected to meet higher standards when they speak out on issues? Or did Stephen Colbert go too far when he used a serious topic as a personal evisceration? Leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes intrigue, breakdowns, and intelligent commentary.